banning books because the thought of children being smarter than you is scary. Mississippi, the state we had to come up with a song to remember how to spell, and even then, some Mississippians still get it wrong. But while we can laugh at the state for its literary issues, Mississippi is used to being in the news for their silly outrages. For example, this actual campaign which had billboards all across the state opposing an actual piece of Mississippi legislation which they said would grant personhood to chicken eggs. Now, for context, this billboard campaign was trying to convince people to vote against abortion, and shocker here, it failed miserably, partly because they compared humans to chickens, in a now hilarious advertising fail. But the fact is that Mississippi has a lot of problems. Public education in Mississippi is ranked last in the nation year after year. Their grade from the U.S. Department of Education is ranked as a fail for academic achievement and D, which is barely passing, for chance of success for students. 24% of the state's population lives under the federal poverty line, and while other states are investing heavily in education, Mississippi is cutting their education budget and choosing to spend $1.5 billion less than what is federally required. So it's a severe understatement to say that Mississippi, or Mississippi as they call it, has enough problems to deal with, on top of one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the nation, high unemployment rates, lack of affordable health care, and many other issues. But Mississippi decided all those problems don't matter in comparison to just one. And that's why they became the lead news story recently, thanks in part to Mayor Gene McGee from Ridgeland, Mississippi. Mayor McGee has decided in this year's financials to withhold more than $110,000 in funding from his town's library, named the Madison County Library System, all because they have a handful of LGBTQIA books on their shelves. Now, there's a few things you should know about this story. First, you should know that Mayor McGee, who answers the question of what would Ricky Bobby look like if he had too much shake and bake, only tried to withhold the first quarter payment for the library. The library gets a yearly budget of $110,000 from the federal government, but in order to distribute the funds, the federal money is given to the local government, which is obligated by federal law to give certain amounts to different agencies such as the library. Every 3 months, the local government has to make this payment to the library. But this quarter in 2021, Mayor Ricky Bobby chose not to. He threatened the library and said they have to pull all LGBTQ books from their shelves in order for him to make this payment, as he said it goes against his religious beliefs to make the payment, knowing they have these books on their shelves. Well, after the library blasted this story on the local news, the mayor came under heavy fire, none more so than from the furry fandom community. Yes, LGBTQ furries spread this story worldwide on social media and started a fundraising campaign to help fund the library, regardless of how Mayor Anti-Buddy the Elf feels about it. Now, here on our channel, we massively support the furry fandom, seeing that they are perfect in every way, and I just so happen to belong to the fandom myself. But in a shocking turn of events, furries raised almost $112,000 in just 19 days. That money goes straight to the library without Mayor Frank the Tank ever having control of it. Meaning, in just 19 days, furries raised more money for the library than the federal government gives them to operate year-round. While this fundraising was taking place, the federal government heard about this going on and came down on Mayor Chaz Michael Michaels like a sledgehammer. They claimed it was against federal laws for a mayor to withhold federal funding from a library when the money has already been given to the local government for that purpose. In the end, the mayor was forced to write the check and pay the library. This means because of Mayor Chaz's homophobia, and thanks to the federal government and the amazing furry fandom stepping in essence, the library just doubled its yearly budget, without having to take a single book off of their shelves. Now, here is where I have some bad news and some good news. The bad news is Mayor Ron Burgundy is not running for re-election. Otherwise, I'm sure our nicknames for him would probably become a part of his challenger's advertising campaign. I mean, We already know Mayor Ron Burgundy wouldn't be the dumbest advertising campaign Mississippi has ever seen. But the good news here is Mayor McGee will end his career being chewed out by the Federal Budgetary Office and laughed at by a bunch of furries in anthropomorphic outfits with deep pockets. The sad news is, this is far from the first time books have been the center of attention. Banning books started in 1933 in Nazi Germany, when the Nazis burned every book they can find. The Nazis knew education was the easiest way to control the population. They were murdering millions of Jews, LGBTQ people, and others. But they didn't just want to erase these people from the earth. They wanted to erase their culture too. So the Nazis began burning books speaking about any Jewish or LGBTQ culture or education they had. They started burning all the clothes, priceless artwork, and getting rid of any remnants of these people, like they didn't exist at all. This was all done in a very targeted effort to get rid of the culture of these people and control the remaining populace. This was partly why World War II is sometimes referred to as the Culture War. Over the coming years, many places have tried to do the same in banning books. Just this past fall, the American Library Association received an unprecedented number of requests to ban over 330 books, more books than any other time in history. Most of these ban requests were put on books written by people of color and LGBTQ authors. These hateful parents argue that it teaches kids pornography
and LGBTQ issues. Children can be traumatized by these non-biblical issues.
I can tell you what's inappropriate is a man in a Speedo talking about sex to class, or a drag queen coming into an elementary school.
You see, these parents are not free thinkers, and they didn't read the books themselves. And come on, have you seen their scores? Let's be honest and say reading a book is beyond some of these parents' grades levels. What happens in most cases is a hate group will go through a book with an LGBTQ character, or even a book which normalizes being gay or trans to the reader. Next, the hate group will cherry pick a few words from the few hundred pages of text. Next, they'll post about the quote on social media, even though it's blatantly out of context. Then these parents will blindly follow and scream to ban the book in their school or town. But they always make sure to include how they believe it's pushing pornography on their children. Why? Well, because saying it goes against their freedom of religion doesn't work, and courts have ruled having books in public libraries about race or LGBTQ issues are protected under freedom of speech. So these hateful parents and leaders from groups like Moms for Liberty and No Left Turn, both groups funded by religious hate groups and conservative political movements, decided to take words out of context of what's in these books to call them pornography instead. This way it gets around the Freedom of Speech Amendment and simply allows their bigotry to flourish. These Karens also claim that the books show how to be gay or transgender. The simple answer is no. I read plenty of straight books as a child, and I'm still gay. Reading a book about a character you identify with doesn't make you into that character. It only shows you how normal your personality is. After all, Mayor McGee read Elf, a short story of a tall tale back when he was a kid, and it didn't turn him into Buddy the Elf or Will Ferrell, did it? Oh wait, maybe it did. Anyway, for other kids who read an LGBTQ book, it shows them how normal their classmate or friend is. So it's no wonder why schools which have LGBTQ books in their libraries and teach LGBTQ education in their classrooms have higher GPA scores, less bullying, higher graduation rates, and so on. But that hasn't stopped schools from trying to ban these books and basically ban the education of their own students, even though it results in them having lower scores from the federal grading system. In 1996, Florida tried to ban LGBTQ books and failed. The librarians who stood up for the First Amendment right to keep the books on their shelves were even awarded the Intellectual Freedom Award from the state that year. In 2005, Alabama, Arkansas, and Oklahoma tried banning LGBTQ books under state law, but all three failed because of First Amendment rights to freedom of speech. And that brings us to our overarching theme here. Anyone who tries stopping a child from reading an educational book or novel with an LGBTQ character is trying to push their religious beliefs on others and stop others from having freedom of speech, both of which are illegal. Now, you can take my word for that, but everything I just said was taken from all of those cases in Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and even the case in Mississippi, where judges and lawmakers ruled in favor of freedom of speech and the equal rights of LGBTQ voices. In each of these cases, and every other case where a group of people was trying to ban a book from library or store shelves for LGBTQ content or characters, it only brings more attention to the books in question. It's something called the Streisand effect, which is a phenomenon where the attempt to suppress something only brings more attention or notoriety to it. Basically, it's as if I told you not to push the big red button and left you alone in the room with the big red button. Chances are you weren't going to press the button before I mentioned it, but now that I told you not to, now you're wondering what that button does, and chances are you're going to press it to find out. Similarly, celebrities routinely do this. For example, when Troye Sivan's adult pictures were leaked online, he kept telling people not to look at them. And when I came across that story of Troy telling me not to look at photos of him with no clothes on, I may or may not, but definitely did, spend all day in my bedroom that day with zero homework being done. My point is that every time someone tries to silence something like this, it only brings more attention to it. For a prime example of this, look at this case from Mississippi. I was perfectly fine going my entire life without talking about a severely homophobic state like Mississippi. But here we are talking about Mayor D'Angelo Vickers. And that brings up a great question. If time and time again, whenever these homophobes try to silence LGBTQ voices, it just brings more attention to our cause and literally brings in hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding to help boost these LGBTQ voices in a seemingly homophobic area, why do these mayors and homophobes do it? The answer to that brings us to the library. I know, neither of us want to go there in the age of the internet. That's why we created Google, so we wouldn't have to go to the scary place to find a book using the card catalog. But the truth is, the library just got a whole lot scarier. These groups like Moms for Liberty and No Left Turn have been reportedly threatening librarians with arrest and violent attacks if they keep LGBTQ books on their shelves. They've been showing up to school board meetings and getting arrested for violent outbreaks against school board members, even though many parents who show up to protest the books don't even have kids who go to the school, nor do they live in the districts themselves. And it's not just violence they're threatening. It's their jobs and livelihoods too of these board members and teachers. But why would parents fight so hard for something that would take away valuable education from their kids? Well, the panic these parents have is a very small piece of a much larger pie, being manufactured by these hate groups and Republicans who want to see something called school choice. Basically, it would allow any parent to choose the school their child goes to. If they don't like the way a public school is teaching something, they can choose another school, and public funding would have to go to the other school to allow their child to attend that school instead. If they don't like the way that school is either, they can move on to the next and the next, all the while suing each school in their path for thousands of dollars for teaching their kids about gay people. The real harm comes in two waves. First, the students would be forced to go to a private school, which pushes anti-LGBTQ and racist lessons on children, because they still haven't read their Bible to know it's not a sin to be gay, and have yet to read a science book to know it's valid to be transgender. And now these churches, which own private schools, would be getting public funding, something conservatives have been wanting for years now. But secondly, the public schools would be forced to teach less and less, in fear of losing students, funding, and getting sued. In fact, in Tennessee recently, they passed a law requiring all schools to prohibit any teaching that would cause, quote, discomfort, guilt, anguish, or distress solely because of the individual's race or sex. But I know what you're thinking. Doesn't that kind of apply to everything taught in history, health, science, literature, and every other class in school? Yeah, it does, and it's worded this broadly on purpose. While this law is mainly focused on keeping education about slavery and how people of color are treated out of white classrooms as if racism never existed or somehow it's over, the last two words here are pretty clear, or sex, meaning no school in Tennessee can even talk about gender or sex anymore. Essentially, they hid an anti-trans law inside of an anti-being people of color law. Florida recently went even further and just outright banned talking about sexual orientations or gender identity in schools, as if it's a bad thing for teachers to tell their students how normal they are. They even proposed an amendment to that law once it was passed to force schools to out LGBTQ members as LGBTQ to their parents, even if it puts them in harm's way. And you know what, Florida? Good luck trying to talk to your students about geography next year without showing them a map, because you just banned talking about being gay, yet your state kinda looks and somehow always manages to act like America's dick. But seriously, it's kinda weird for Florida to ban talking about gay people. I mean, their governor, Ron DeSantis, ran for governor just so he can put on his Grindr profile that he's the leader of America's dick, hoping none of us would see through his charade that he's just trying to compensate for the size of his. But more importantly than the Grindr profile he hides from his wife, Ron DeSantis also thinks banning gay talk in schools is the most important thing on his plate right now. Meanwhile, his state continues to have one of the worst rates of COVID-19 in the nation. But the truth is, these hate groups and parents don't care about how little education their children receive. They don't care about their children's future. Otherwise, they'd care that Mississippi ranks 35th out of 50 states in K-12 academic achievement, and dead last in public education overall. Alabama ranked dead last at 50 out of 50 states in K-12 academic achievement. Arkansas ranks at number 41 out of 50, and Oklahoma ranks at number 42 out of 50. Now, who's to say these parents not receiving a proper education as children in the poorest educated states in the nation has any link to them blindly following hate groups with horrible agendas without even taking the time to read these books themselves or care about their children's futures? Who's to say? But I will say maybe their education evaluation numbers would improve if they picked up one of those books they were trying so hard to ban and actually read it. So we decided to help them out with this a bit. You see, on top of hosting a TV show that's broadcast worldwide and on local networks this week in the Ridgeland, Mississippi area where Mayor Ricky Bobby is from, I'm also an author of an LGBTQ children's book named Shadow's First Christmas. This book is all about a Labrador named Shadow, who is adopted in the loving home of a gay couple named Alex and Troy. The story tells how normal and loving a gay couple is, but also teaches the history of the Stonewall Inn, which is the single most important location for our LGBTQ community. And the reason I'm telling you this is because this week we actually sent a signed copy of my LGBTQ children's book down to Madison County Library System in Ridgeland, Mississippi. So on top of their library having doubled the funding this year thanks to the furry fandom, if you live in the Ridgeland, Mississippi area and want to borrow, read, and learn from LGBTQ books and authors, you now have one more LGBTQ option on the shelves of your public library thanks to your friends at Powered by Rainbows. And that invitation to the public very much includes an invitation to Mayor Gene McGee. And look, Mayor McGee, I know throughout this piece we compared you to different characters of Will Ferrell, but I mean, it wasn't hard to draw the comparison. First off, it's kind of scary how much you look like him. Secondly, Buddy the Elf was completely clueless in Elf the movie. D'Angelo Vickers on The Office boasted about being much more powerful and talented than he actually was, until he was challenged by his superiors who put him in his place. Rightfully so, I might add. And Ron Burgundy is completely clueless to what is and isn't appropriate, is totally stuck in the times, is utterly self-obsessed, not to mention is widely known for his 1970s attire. And if I didn't mention Will Ferrell in this piece at all of that is likely what your voters would say about you. And more importantly, Mayor McGee, maybe if you read a few LGBTQ books intended for kindergartners, including the one I'm sending you, maybe you'd learn that the 1970s ended 50 years ago, because any book worth banning is a book worth reading. Anyway, if you want to learn more about the LGBTQ community, check out this episode right here, or subscribe for weekly episodes. And if you want to see behind the scenes and bloopers from every episode, consider becoming a member by hitting join down below. As always, I'm your host, Professor Pride. Have a gay day, everyone, and bye for now.